Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, absurdism in the extreme. It's all available here in the Tales from the Omni Vault book series. Check the description for Amazon links so you can get your copies and start reading today. Thank you all, and now, on to the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and I've got mixed feelings about how Super7 has been handling their Godzilla license. My feelings about them have been very on and off. The reaction figure line, for example, they're a neat little novelty of sorts, but for the size that they are very expensive. Specifically for the size. So I generally don't get them unless they're a novelty like this Shogun Godzilla figure. Now supposedly the Ultimate figures are the big game, right? Because they've got the big articulation of something like Kaya Toys or Monster Arts, but they're much bigger. But I find that their quality, again, doesn't really justify the price. I recently took a chance on this glow-in-the-dark Heat Ray variant Godzilla, and some of you might be wondering, why isn't the Heat Ray head attached? Well, I'll tell you, because the Heat Ray head won't stay on. I have tried. Apparently other people have tried as well. They can't get it to stay on. I do not know why. No joke, I actually hurt my arm trying to force this thing to stay on the body, and it still didn't work. So I'm not happy with how the Ultimates have turned out at all. So I figure my last chance that I'm going to give them comes down to what's apparently being called the Super Kaiju line. That's a Target exclusive and has just launched with the Heisei Godzilla and Mechagodzilla. Specifically, they're calling this Godzilla 89, but it's the Heisei Godzilla. So, all the same, that's what I'll be referring to it as. These figures just arrived, and the question is, are they worth it? I've seen videos saying that the Super7 team has listened to feedback about their other figures, and they've addressed that in these figures, so are they worth it? Well, let's see. In terms of detail, they look okay for the most part. They're certainly recognizable as their specific iterations. Obviously, the scaling isn't quite movie accurate, because if it were, Mechagodzilla would be way taller than Godzilla. He is still slightly taller, though, so I'll give it that. Detail's not quite 100% accurate, though. Mechagodzilla's head looks a little too big, actually, I think. Maybe it's the nose that's a little longer or something. Godzilla, I guess, looks fine. It's clear they kind of used the same mold for the Ultimates, but shrunk down a little, and not exactly the same, because it doesn't have the exact same points of articulation. Speaking of articulation, though, that seems to be somewhere between the reaction figures and the Ultimates figures. Because you've got more articulation than you would expect, shoulders, elbows, knees can move, feet can turn. On both of these figures, Godzilla has a bendable tail, apparently. I'm not going to mess around with that too much because I don't want to bust the wire. But another thing that's notable is that they have mouths that can open and close. That's something I never really understood with the Ultimates figures. They don't have hinged jaws. You have to switch the heads out, which is ridiculous because the heads are big enough, and I've seen hinged jaws on smaller figures than this. These guys, however, they do have hinged jaws, and they work. I'll give them that. But, at the same time, you can't turn the wrists, so there's that. Arms have somewhat limited motion. Also, Mechagodzilla's legs are oddly stiff. Like, I can move them at the hip joints easily enough. The knees, I'm struggling with the knees and the feet. So I don't necessarily want to mess around with them too much and accidentally break them. I'll see what I can figure out later, but uh, that's an odd thing. Godzilla, I haven't had that problem. You could, excuse me, you can see I can bend the knees easily. No big deal. When we compare them to the Bandai Godzilla action figures, though, I mean, it's a pretty interesting comparison because we're once again dealing with Godzilla and Mechagodzilla, just of different eras. I would actually say the Bandai Godzilla action figures are a little bit better because I have no problem moving their joints at all. They stand pretty well. Well, once you get them balanced, they stand pretty well. Mechagodzilla, the Super 7 one, maybe it's just because I can't mess with his legs at the moment, but I have to have him positioned just right for this. They also obviously have stuff like the heat ray effects that these guys don't have. And they're a little bit bigger and cheaper. So do with that information as you will. Another selling point that these guys supposedly have, though, is that they're going to come with buildings. Super 7 has actually really pushed this as a major selling point for these figures. That, I believe one ad that they posted on Twitter said, once they're done with this particular line, you'll be able to have an entire cityscape to put your monsters in. But did you notice there's only one building? I've got two figures, but I've just got the one building. That's because the two halves of these buildings are divided between these two. So I'm not exactly pleased with that. The building itself is fine. I mean, obviously it's all one solid color, but you know, the destructible parts fit together just fine. What detail there is looks okay. Supposedly it's to scale with the monsters, and I'll just have to take their word for it. But dividing it between the two figures, that I'm not pleased with. Because, first of all, it's a little bit underhanded. If these buildings really are a major selling point for you because you want a good display for these guys, then you kind of have to get both of these figures, because otherwise you're either left with a top half of a building that has no bottom, or a bottom half of a building that has no top. Sure, it's detail, but you know, where's the rest of it? What if you want to see to set things up where the building's being destroyed, right? And if this is going to be their strategy going forward, it's going to be a very underwhelming cityscape, because you're going to be getting one building for every two monsters. And that's the best case scenario. What if the next wave has three figures and they have a three-segmented building divided between them? So my advice going forward, one figure, one building, however many pieces it takes. I mean, think about what McFarlane Toys has done with their recent Pacific Rim figures, right? They have, sure they're smaller, but you get a Jaeger or Kaiju figure, a four-piece building with a base, two military vehicles, and a comic book. So by the time you get through all of the different entries in it, including the starter kit that they say, you basically do have a full cityscape. I'm not so sure that's going to work out with these guys. So in the end, I mean, I do think these guys are a little bit better than the Ultimate figures, and considering they're only slightly more expensive than the reaction figures but have more articulation to them, I guess that's a bit more justifiable. But I'm once again going to need to see some massive improvements. Don't have the joints be as stiff like Mechagodzilla's legs. Give us more bang for our buck when it comes to the buildings, things like that. Otherwise, you know, again, the Bandai action figures are also on the market and affordable. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be mean to Super 7 or anything, but I guess the best thing I can say about these guys is that they do kind of remind me of the Trendmasters figures from the 90s that I grew up with, which is nice. I guess that gives me a good sense of nostalgia and all, but I don't know. I do think there's still room for improvement, so Please, Super 7, improve with whatever comes next. That's all I have to say about these guys. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.